think of myself as a teacher primarily or at all. I think of myself as a researcher who, because of the unorthodox nature of the research, has to submit to this kind of situation for peer review. That's what this is. This is peer review of my rap, not teaching in any sense of the word. So before I get into it, I'll say a little bit about my attitude toward epistemology and system making generally. This is one of the slightly uncomfortable moments because I have to make distance between myself and large numbers of other people and say, I do not believe in the wars of Atlantis. I do not believe in reincarnation. I do not believe in the healing power of crystals. And a whole string of alienating I do not believe. Fact of the matter is, I don't believe in belief. I think belief is a tremendously stultifying force. What I'm interested in is freedom. And I noticed very early that a belief absolutely precludes the possibility of holding to its opposite. And therefore, if you believe something, you have signed away its opposite and limited yourself. This comes close to the ideal, but not the fact of how science is supposed to be waged. So I'm an impression and fact collector, and I will propound a number of ideas that are very controversial, I guess. And I want you to understand they appear controversial to me, and the controversy over their applicability to reality rages in me at least as strongly as it will rage in any dialogue that I have with any of you. The area that we're working in at the fringe of science, at the frontier of psychology, is too chaotic and disorganized to be called a science at this point. We're in the Baconian phase of it, where you merely collect facts, catalog facts, and wait for emergent patterns to be visible. And this is what I've done, and I began as a skeptic, fairly confident that this kind of examination of reality and collection of facts would support the rationalist, reductionist, minimalist mapping of reality. And I discovered, to my delight and amazement, that the world is quite a complex place. Quite a large percentage of it goes on outside the descriptive power of any metaphor that we presently have a handle on. And so I just want to put that out, that my attitude is one of a kind of skepticism that allows, and I am well known as the proponent of the notion that there is an extraterrestrial or transhuman intelligence accessible through certain psychedelic drugs. I have that experience often, but I am not a believer in it. I'm very puzzled by it. I return again and again to reason as the measure against which all these things have to be played. So peer review is very important, I think, because we're moving in an area where very little is known. We're somewhat in the analogous position to the early explorers of the Amazon, who would sail up the main flow of the Amazon and note in their logs, past a river mouth at noon, 2 miles wide, origin unknown. This is what we are charting, enormous unknown flows of which we are only able to chart the most gross expression of these things. Okay, so that's enough about method. As I understand it, the the matter around which this council is spun is the journey beyond history, and the notion in that implicit is that there is an end to history. So what I want to talk about this morning, and it's the most difficult lecture that I give, because the goal is not to convey a feeling or an impression, but to actually convey an idea. And ideas you either get or don't get. It isn't like you can halfway get how to factor a quadratic equation. You either know how to do it and it's trivial, or you don't know how to do it and it's inconceivable. There are given themes, and this is what the hexagrams are about. This was the genius of the Chinese, to realize that time has elements. The orthodox, or let me put it this way, Western science had to go through a whole conceptual reformulation to realize that space is not simply where you put things. That's how space is treated in Newtonian dynamics, and up until Einstein, it's just the necessary dimension for three-dimensional description. But then Einstein said, well, no, space is a thing affected by magnetic fields, torqued in the nearby vicinity of a star. And so then this notion that it was a thing and that it could have various properties of curvature became allowable. Now what I'm suggesting is that time has elements, 64 of them, as a matter of fact. And the formulators of the I Ching simply, by stilling the heart, by eliminating noise from the body, we're able to see these states, which we could call quantum mechanical, but since they are not material, we don't need to invoke the holy god of quantum mechanics to bless this effort. Anyway, whatever these things are, and in whatever dimension they exist, you could think of them more, I think of them more like Platonic archetypes. The way in which they interpenetrate three-dimensional being is what gives three-dimensional being its primary qualities. The qualities of color, of tone, of emotion, of feeling, all of the descriptive qualities that science has left out and called epiphenomenal and subjective, but which are the things we all experience. You know, what science has achieved is a tremendous devaluation of primary experience. And what this notion is trying to say is that there is possible a physics of experience, an understanding of history that will make it coherent, so that the coherency which we know must be resident in the universe is no longer a value dark dimension to us. The order becomes visible. Now, how does this work? I always use this rather idiotic example, but it amuses me. It's that if you find yourself in Hadrian's hamburger joint having a burger, there is a direct causal relationship between your doing that and the campaigns of the Roman Emperor Hadrian. You are in fact passing through the Hadrian analogic moment. Now, I think the only person who has really understood this to bedrock is probably James Joyce, who realized that a walk to the store is the Trojan War. It is the Trojan War. You cannot pass through a gate without passing through the gates of Thermopylae. You cannot, and so a notion like reincarnation or past lives is seen in a whole different light. What we are harmonic adumbrations of events in the past. Now this comes fairly close to Rupert Sheldrake's notion, and we've talked a lot about this. What is absent in Rupert's scheme is an explanation of novelty. What he is saying is that the past has a tremendous influence on the future, that the very fact that something has happened sets up all following time for a higher likelihood of this thing happening. What I'm suggesting is that that's true, but that then the mystery of why there is novelty is solved by realizing that the way in which the morphogenetic field impinges upon reality is through a fractal expression. And there would be nothing surprising about this. The electromagnetic waves described by Maxwell's equation, that is essentially a fractal transform. It is how waves work. So another way of thinking about this notion that we are adumbrations of larger historical epochs is the aphorism, Rome falls 9 times an hour. This is the idea, and it does. I mean, I always notice it. It's just there. We are very state-bounded in our self-observations, and we only tend to value what is relevant to profane existence and communication. So the fact that as you sweep the house, you notice Rome falling 9 times an hour, there's not much to say about it. It's just, I think weird things. I wonder if everybody thinks weird things. I think the answer is yes. And that not only does Rome fall 9 times an hour, but the Celts move out of Spain and into England 9 times an hour, and so forth. That really the present is an interference pattern caused by epochs in the past coming together to create a certain particular situation. So what has been happening since 1945, since the dawn moment over Hiroshima, is that the entire history of the universe is being recapitulated. Now, it has many cycle levels of cyclic expression. On one level, the first land animals have yet to appear. We are truly in the inchoate darkness. On the level of the 4,306-year cycle, we are deep in the Dark Ages. And on the basis of that, in the barbarians, the time when the barbarian hordes poured into Europe, the sacking of Eleusis and all that, I see punk culture as the harmonic response to the fact of this happening. On the basis of it, I would predict that in the late 80s, the new wave punk phenomenon will give way to an almost Gothic religious sensibility, which will be, in fact, a recapitulation of the early Middle Ages and feminine... Well, no. In the Mariological cults that found their expression at Chartres and places like that in the early 90s, we will have a feminist revival which will be slightly wrong-headed because it will make those same mistakes that those Gothic people made. We will not even reach the threshold of the Industrial Revolution until about 2003. So you see, the notion of us sitting around making sense of things is quite preposterous. I mean, we are still waiting for Newton, let alone for Maxwell and Einstein. We are not prehistory, except on the highest level. So this intensification will occur. Now, what is it leading to? This is the part, Christianity insists that the world will end, and that it will just roll up like a scroll, and the triumphant Christ will come to judge the living and the dead. Now, why do they believe that? Obviously, apocalypse haunts history like a ghost in the kind of cosmology I'm defining. There must be anticipations of it. The death of every human being is an anticipation of the apocalypse. The collapse of every empire. Any cessation is a part of the sensation. It is the archetype of the ending. So this knitting together, this compactification of novelty and connectedness, which is emanating out from the most densely compactified and connected thing in nature, which is the human cortex. This is an interesting thing. We've worked so hard to move ourselves out of the center of the mandala. But the fact of the matter is the most complex object in nature is the human brain. Curious. This knitting together that is emanating from the human brain is accelerating at such a rate that we are rapidly going to become unrecognizable to ourselves. The curious thing about this notion I'm propounding is that it carries no obligation. It is a way of making you free by admitting you are more deterministically bound than you ever dreamed. You know, you had to go into Hadrian's hamburger joint. It was settled when Hadrian invaded Scotland that you had to go into that hamburger joint. And so we are bearing an unnecessary burden of guilt and responsibility. We are living in a cosmos, not a chaos. The universe is doing what it wants to do. It is calling forth the kind of novelty that it wants to call forth. The fact that we cannot understand its purpose is our problem, you know, and we are not its victims.